Good morning. All right, a little bit more. Good morning. All right. Atlanta is definitely a fun town, and that's about what I expected for the first good morning. So, hey, thank you guys all for coming today. We appreciate it. I think we've got a great panel and some really interesting folks to talk about their perspective on making sure that, again, along the theme of the conference, when we're thinking about smart cities, it's really not just about technology, right? And in some cases, technology is probably the least important part of it. I'm Mike Zeto, and I'm the Vice President of Global Solutions for AT&T's Advanced Solutions business. I'm also the founder and general manager of our Smart Cities business globally for the company. So I've been involved in the industry here, the Smart Cities industry, for about 4 years when we stood up the business. We were the first carrier to stand up a business because we felt like it was really important, and it brought together a lot of different parts of our ecosystem as a carrier. And it also allowed us to bring together a lot of our partners that, as a whole, we could drive a tremendous amount of value for citizens that we serve and businesses that we serve in communities across the U.S. and globally. Some of the partners are here with us today, and I want to let them introduce themselves. So, ladies first, Deb.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Atlanta. I'm Debra. I'm the Managing Director for Smart Cities and Inclusive Innovation for Georgia Tech.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathryn Cleary, and I am with Mastercard. And I hope you're all familiar with Mastercard, but what you may not be familiar with is our focus on financial inclusion, which is at the core of everything that we do. So I get to lead a team of folks who have the opportunity to interact with all levels of government and the private sector to co-create and solve the needs of cities in order to improve the quality of life, which goes directly to Mastercard's commitment to be a force for good in the world and to do well by doing good.
Morning, everyone. My name's Miguel Sangalang. I'm the Deputy Mayor for Budget and Innovation of Los Angeles. I was appointed by Mayor Eric Garcetti. Just a little bit of a description about what I do. I try and boil it down to two things where my job is to make sure some crazy things don't happen, and other crazy things do. We have the budget, we have the personnel, IT. We actually also have sustainability and equity and gender equity and the census under our portfolio. So we touch many different things that I think is going to be just covered, today. So very much cross-cutting, trying to make sure that we're looking at our services and improving them in every single way that we can.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so I think you can tell just by the introductions that, you obviously can't have a smart city without a team of people inside of the city that are extremely innovative, because part of the goal is to do things differently than you've done them before, right? It's to create policy that you may not have had. It's to find ways to finance things that you may not have done. And it's to focus on inclusion in ways that you may not have done in the past, right? And then, you look at an AT&T and a Mastercard and the point of view that we bring to things. We are looking at it from a global perspective. We're looking at how do we help this scale, because we've got scale ourselves. And again, I think we work closely together on a daily basis on initiatives from Schenectady to LA to San Jose to Europe. So we're constantly working as a large private sector partner group to drive this forward, not just around smart cities, but really about technology and innovation, inclusion, and CSR in general. And then, from Deb's perspective, it's always awesome to have a research university as the anchor in a city. Atlanta's been very blessed to have that. We've got a really strong chamber. We've got a really strong private sector ecosystem. We've got a really strong innovation ecosystem. And we've got really great universities here, with Georgia Tech is probably, and not probably, but the leading research university in some aspects. And then we've also got Emory and others here as well. So, Deb's approach has been fantastic here in Atlanta, because she has brought the ability to think like a CIO coming from Pittsburgh, also as a consultant in leading roles with large consulting organizations, and now come here to Georgia Tech and tie that all together and create some amazing programs that won't just benefit the city of Atlanta, but will benefit the state of Georgia, and I think can be replicated across the United States and potentially globally. So, with that, Deb, why don't you tell us, we've been working together for several years as AT&T in Pittsburgh, AT&T in Georgia Tech, AT&T in Atlanta. you've seen some of these new initiatives start from the beginning over like the last year and a half, 2 years. What do you see as the role of the universities in the smart city ecosystem? And then what are some of the challenges that you can help us as an ecosystem and cities all solve for?
Well, thank you, Mike, for the kind introduction. Everyone, I didn't pay him to say that. That was just very nice and humbling to have him hear that. Yeah, the role of the university. So it's very evolved over the years. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a really good complement with industry and local government because local government doesn't necessarily, and Miguel can speak more on this, has a lot of competing attention and priorities. There's a lot of firefighting going on. There's a lot of resources that are being allocated to many different things, and you are constantly being asked to do more with less. And that's why I think local government is at the heart of innovation, given the evolving limitations and the growing expectations, and especially how local government is getting very excited in terms of its leadership role. Regardless of what happens at the federal level, at the international level, cities have risen up and they've been doing some enormous work. And then from the university's perspective, there is a constant hunger to do innovative research, especially from a research university, and that's evolved from the traditional town-gown relationship when the university essentially coexists in a parallel silo to a city. You really now have shared infrastructure in terms of transportation, utilities, the built environment and its assets, and you have shared constituents in terms of students and professors and faculty and staff living within a city. And so there's a real incentive to do something good within the community that they live in, and also the expertise that can contribute to what the city doesn't necessarily have in terms of that research, technology, data, and that kind of analytics. And so what we've been able to do with the help of Mike and others is that really complement that, where the university essentially becomes the R&D hub for cities. And it's really good when you couple it with industry, you create that P3, the real P3 kind of model where industry can support this process because it also benefits, at the end of the day, broader economic development and talent creation, because universities are churning out the students that have the skills to move forward for broader workforce development that can then feed into the industry, that can also then feed into local government and cities. So it's a really exciting ecosystem that is not led by the university, but is very much coupled with really good innovations coming from Mastercard, from AT&T, together collectively with a very receptive and innovative local government leader and champion.
Yeah, I think you made some great points too, because one of the things that every mayor is tasked with is obviously public safety, and then also economic development, and now more and more you're hearing about workforce development, right? And we were at an interesting dinner the other night. It was called Revolt, and there was a group of leaders from around Atlanta, and we talk about talent pipeline, right, and workforce development, and this is where it's really important to have a real strong chamber of commerce and a strong private sector in a city that's focused on talent development and workforce development, because we've got issues across the city of Atlanta, and every city has them, right? I know Mayor Garcetti deals with them as well, but workforce development is extremely important, and it should start at a very early age, at the 8-year-old level up through school in STEM and STEAM, and getting people ready for these jobs. Kathryn, how have you guys worked with research universities? And then Miguel, I'll ask you the same, because you've got a ton of research universities out there in the Los Angeles County area, and certainly within the city as well, right? So, Kathryn.
Yeah, we work very closely. I mean, everything we do is about co-creating and partnership, and it's so important because no one entity can do it alone. Yep. So we work closely with universities like Harvard, like Georgia, and others to be able to co-create solutions that are going to impact the residents of different communities.
Anything around, it was funny because at the Revolt dinner, one of the things that came up, and I shouldn't say funny, but it's a problem, financial education at a really young age in communities, right? Anything around that you're working with? And again, I really believe that when we're talking about smart cities, These are all components, and I think this is what Artie's done a great job doing here. She's done a hell of a job taking the focus off of technology and talking about solving real problems like financial literacy in certain communities so that you can create a smarter city across the board.
You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So MasterCard, I mentioned earlier that MasterCard's all about financial inclusion, and an extension of that is financial education. So a few things that we're doing. We partner with a company called EverFi, as well as other partners, who help us to reach those folks. And you talked about starting at an early age. So MasterCard has invested with a company, EverFi, who I mentioned, to go into the New York City schools and the schools in St. Louis to start that education at that early age, at the elementary school level, and then up through graduation, because we think it's so important for them to understand the importance of how to manage their financials, right? I mean, it's basic things that right now people are graduating or students are graduating and they don't have that basic knowledge. We are looking to expand that. Another piece from a financial education, so we have the Direct Express portfolio, which is the largest prepaid program in the world. And this program is given to folks who many times are unbanked, and it's their way of receiving Social Security or other benefits from the federal government. These folks who are unbanked, they don't have the basic knowledge that the folks in this room have. And so a big component of that portfolio is MasterCard's investment in providing them with education on how to manage their money, how to budget, and smart ways to spend.
That's great. And do me a favor, please get with some folks here in Atlanta, selfish plug because I live here, and get that program and get engaged with APS because we could definitely use your help here. And I know as a community, business community, we'd all welcome that. So that would be great.
And obviously, LA would also like that too. So
yeah, LA wants in on that too. All the cities always want in on all the good stuff, huh?
Of course.
Right.
Why would we not? So, but I wanted to react a little bit to what Debra was saying because I think it's actually quite important, especially at the local government context, because I think there was different speeds of innovation before, or research or information that we were kind of getting from the university system, and all good things, great partners, but my alma mater, UCLA, is one of those that obviously partners very closely with the city of Los Angeles, but theirs tends to be, when it comes to research, much more regional, so it's very big. The unit of the city is a little bit smaller than that. And so the fact that we've been able to build some partnerships that are actually looking at then the operation of the city, it's great. We have, I mentioned this yesterday, the clean tech incubator that we've partnered with UCLA that's looking to try and bridge and close the gap that we'd have to try and reduce all of our greenhouse gas emissions in Los Angeles. And that's a very important public-private partnership for us to try and build new technologies for that. And then also the integrated Internet of Things with USC, which I think AT&T might be a partner with. But I will also say Verizon, since obviously we're not, as a city, we're not biased. So we have many different companies. We have Warner Brothers that's also part of that, and who are all trying to figure out how we get to some new level of collaborative thinking around Internet of Things, since there's so many different things that are happening there.
Yeah, I know the guys that own Warner, by the way. Yeah. It's AT&T.
Let me just add a little bit from what Miguel said, because I think the change of universities is really perceptive, because before, one of our biggest performance metrics for a university was just graduation rates, right? If we graduate from college, that's how we look at the U.S. News and Report rankings, alumni given, et cetera. That metrics was what determined universities and what they cared about. There's been a whole shift, especially at Georgia Tech, when we launched our Creating the Next in Education report launched by our provost, which looks at K through grade. One, like Mike said, you start younger because the pipeline, especially the pipeline to get into college and the diversity of that pipeline needs to start younger, and it's very much at the third grade when from below third grade, you are just learning to read, and then at third grade, you are reading to learn. So if at that third grade level, you cannot read at a certain literacy, you will not be successful in going beyond any of the financial literacy and other subjects. And so, we very much care about how to develop the students so that they are competitive to get in with college. And then even beyond college, because of the change in roles of technology, because of data and new technologies that didn't currently exist, we are constantly in that continuous education process. How do we do professional education development? How do we train leaders like Miguel? Or how do we support leaders like Miguel into the roles that they need with this advent of change and keeping on that education process even beyond that initial graduation?
Yeah, absolutely. Miguel, I was going to stay on you there for a minute. LA Los Angeles County's massive, right? Los Angeles as a city is huge. How are you leveraging innovation in your role to drive change? You talked a little bit about how you're working with some of the research universities, but maybe more specifically problems that you have that are either global or that are regional that you're trying to solve for and working with maybe partners as well.
Yeah. I think that's actually it's a fairly long answer, but I'm going to try and shorten it up in that really creating some of that space to have that discussion. I think for local governments, it's been traditionally a very top-down, or here's the service that we're trying to create, this is how we're going to push it out. Community engagement is one meeting that we have to check the box on. And now we've actually been looking at other partners like AT&T for the Shake Alert app that's actually solving one of LA's most earthquakes. It's a big problem for Los Angeles. We're solving that. We're actually collaborating then with other institutions like the USGS, the Geological Survey, with AT&T to kind of build these things, and then taking feedback from our residents. So it's that aspect of then kind of creating that space for how we can innovate within our cities. And I think the regional approach has been really kind of like leadership driven as well, since Mayor Garcetti just constantly encourages collaboration and using Los Angeles as a test bed, since we actually have, as you're saying, 88 other cities in LA County, right? And it's a region with 18 million people that are trying to traverse the county in order to work and live as well.
That's awesome. And, so I guess, when I think about LA, there's a ton of opportunity, right? I mean, you're trying to solve for a lot of different problems. Some of them are systemic across the US, right? And then you mentioned emergency preparedness, which again, you're doing things there. And again, we're lucky enough to be a partner in that. Thank you for that and that plug. But that's something that we can actually take, and we can use that application globally, and really that same set of partnerships in different regions across the U.S. So thank you for that.
And
leadership.
on that, I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, you go ahead. No.
No, I was just wanted to highlight also on that, to that point, and with your partnership, one of the things that we're exploring with the City Key platform, and talking about how we're coming together to ideate around how do we reach your residents and solve for many of their needs. So as an example, when we talk about emergency preparedness and earthquakes, one of the things that we're working with LA, or we're going to do a workshop with to ideate around, is how do we bring partners together to provide residents with an identification card that then, in the event of a disaster, we can disperse emergency funding to. But it can also provide access to other areas. So that's something that we're going to be talking about, and we're going to continue to explore, and we're exploring with many other cities. But it's a great example of these partnerships of many people coming together and co-creating to solve for multiple needs with one platform.
Yeah, and that's extremely important. And I was actually going to ask you to talk about City Key, because I think that, as we've had meetings with different cities, with LA and Mayor Garcetti, with Mayor Liccardo in San Jose, with yourself and Miguel and others, that vehicle, right, is something that can be piloted, if you will, here, but can only be scaled by global companies like a Mastercard. Now, that's not to say that all the innovation has to be developed within that company. This is where you can go and you can lean on your local ecosystems to start to bring them into the fold, right? But the scale part of it has to come from a big company, right? And I've worked on both sides. I've had small companies that I've started, and I've had large companies that I've run businesses for, and now I understand the power of scale and the complexity that it takes to get to that, or the amount of money that you would need to raise, right, which would not be good for the founders, right, to get to that point. So, that's one platform you have. What about City Possible? Talk about that platform as well, because I think that's something that AT&T is involved in, and that leads right into sort of your line of business where, you know, you've got City Possible and you're trying to solve problems for urban mobility and getting the community involved, which, by the way, community engagement, I think, you know, I want to give you guys some credit because there's not a lot of cities that are really focused on pulling the community together to get their input on what they would like to see from an innovation perspective, right? And so you guys are doing a great job with that. So tell us about City Possible, and then we can jump back over to Miguel.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for being a member of City Possible. We all know that cities often have shared issues or opportunities. And a lot of these issues are stemming from the acceleration of urbanization within cities. Half of today's population already live in cities, and it's expected to be about 70% by 2050. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lot of these cities are trying to solve for these urban issues in isolation. And, you know, for that reason, they end up trying to reinvent the wheel, and they're just not bringing in, you know, or they're not reaching the right folks to help them. So what City Possible aims to do is to be the leading connector for cities to co-create, pilot, and scale solutions that will be able to have an impact to improve people's lives. And so we are working with multiple cities around the globe in having these ideation sessions and bringing private, public, nonprofit, tech partners to the table and having conversations around, you know, how can we improve quality of life for the residents in your community? And it's about the discussion, and it's main topics, Mike, like you mentioned, like mobility, financial inclusion, leveraging data to make smart decisions. So an example, I talked about City Key. Another example would be the work that we're doing within transit and with mobility. So over 180 cities around the world are leveraging shared learnings to help transform the way that residents and tourists are accessing their public transportation through the advancements of technology. And so right here in the US, New York, MTA, and Miami all launched contactless payments in the past few months. And what that means is that residents and tourists can now access transportation without having to stop at a vending machine to get a ticket. They can just use a contactless card, a mobile device, or a wearable and tap and go. And that has really streamlined the daily commute, but it's also made it easier for tourists to access transportation because now as they visit different cities around the world, it's the same process, it's consistent. In addition to that, it has provided cities and the transit authorities with many efficiencies, cost efficiencies, operational efficiencies, and others.
I have two reactions to everything that's being said, and thank you actually for saying that we're actually taking kind of a look at the human aspect of it. We actually try and build that very much upfront when we're building some of our services or even re-engineering some of our service. I mean, we had help from a company called IDEO, if anyone's familiar. But if they're not familiar, it's like basically a company that like would rebuild McDonald's for fun just to try and figure out how to, you know, do new cool things. You should check them out. So all of that and kind of using behavioral insights and nudge has been very important for us to kind of shape all of this. So I think that's very key before you even get to technology, right? And then the other aspect actually that I'm hearing, and especially since the title of the series is, you know, the connection between humanity and technology, I think a very like phase zero thing that we're all talking about, and the assumption there is that we actually have really good identity management, even within cities. And I think that's something that, you know, probably Asian cities deal with a little bit differently. European cities deal with it a little bit differently, and then we're I think as American cities kind of trying to struggle and figure that out, because I think that's when you actually start getting the aspect of being able to do more of those payments, getting more of the services from the city side, trying to use the data then to do more research for what we can actually do, and I think that's on the government and something very basic that we all have to kind of focus on and build on.
Yeah, absolutely. And Deb, I guess, you know, what do you see as some of the biggest opportunities from a smart city technology perspective? How can we leverage technology to drive some value, within the environment, taking both of your backgrounds and putting them together, and then can we scale that across the state, right? If we can get the pilot stood up in cities, is that something that we can then work with regional partners like utilities, like a Georgia Power? Do you really believe that we have the ability to scale that across the state or any state?
I do think that as a whole, where we are in our whole ecosystem now is the scale and challenge. I think we have been very successful across the board in terms of various smart city pilots, demonstration areas. There are different verticals that have been really strong, but the scale in part is still something we as a community need to address head on. And I think it's something that could be further thought through what we just said collectively in terms of these partnerships, because they address the weaknesses each of us have. So, very clearly and honestly, from a university, if we didn't have the city pushing us or industry pushing us, we would be very happy within our own laboratories or our own silos doing research, right? Or from a city perspective, right? The political pressures, the political cycles, the change of leadership. If you didn't have universities or industry leadership stabilizing the fluctuations of electoral cycles, then maybe that wouldn't be going. And then, of course, industry, you are driven by certain financial matters that, from a university or a city, we don't have the same concerns or pressures on. So, each of these are different limitations that we have in the smart city space. But by coming together, I think we balance that out. And so to get to your point on scale, it's showing that now there is demonstrated success in each of these different areas, and then trying to create the new business models, the new policy regulations, the new behavioral changes that allow for that. It's not the technology question, because the technology has already proven itself. It's really about the policy, the regulatory framework, and the behavioral stakeholder engagement, making sure the voices are included, making sure the voices are heard to take us there.
And that's the next piece of it, right? And that is how we're going to get to scale. You answered that masterfully, as you usually do. At the end of the day, we know the technology's there. It's all been proven. It's been trialed. Yeah, new things are going to come. Technology's going to evolve. But if we don't have policy that allows cities to evaluate things differently, procure them differently, fund them differently, right? If you don't have companies out there like the smart city capitals of the world and some of the investors that are using different ways to fund opportunities, and cities have the policy and the ability to embrace those funding models, we're not going to get scale, right? And I think, one of the things that I've taken away from this week is we've always known that it was going to be important to get citizens involved, but to your point earlier, now is the time to get the citizens involved, because we know enough, we have enough data points that we can give them the outputs of the trials, right? We can give them the successes, we can give them the key learnings or the opportunities where we can improve as industry and as a group working together. And now it's the time to get them involved, bring these new funding models in, start to drive some scale, change some policy, and really start to solve some problems for citizens, right? So, any closing thoughts from anybody? I mean, Miguel, you got a mic right there ready to go. I just put you on the spot. I saw you taking notes.
I thought you closed it out well, so that's why.
Okay, all right, all right. Well, hey,
I'm sitting here. That's very good.
I'll take that. This is the least I've talked in a long time, so I mean, this is a good thing. Kathryn, anything from you?
No, just on what you had said, just emphasizing we are stronger together. And as we try to get to scale, I truly believe that as we work together, that's how we're going to do it. Nobody can achieve what we want to achieve in a silo. So it's just continuing to come together as a partnership and co-creating, and that's really how we're going to make this happen.
Awesome. And Deb, I think I mean.
Just a shout out to Artie and the team, but just know for everyone here, this is not just a one-time expo. This is definitely a multi-year initiative. And so I hope actually the next time you come on this panel or you sit here, we will have something more substantial to share in terms of what we've been able to do. So that's a challenge for all of us and something that, motivates us to think about this as a multi-year effort versus a one-off discussion.
Yeah, I agree with that. And And again, one of the things, I want to echo what Deb said. And I saw Artie earlier. I don't know if she's here. Thank you to her and her team for putting this together. I can tell you that from a content perspective, I've been doing these shows now for 4 years since I started this business. This is the best group of speakers on panels addressing everything versus just technology that we've had anywhere in the world in the last 4 years. And I hope that this event continues to scale. So go and tell everybody you know about this event. I would appreciate that personally. I hope you all have a lot of success. You're all partners in this ecosystem. You all care about citizens that you live, work, and play with, and your families that live in these environments. So let's try to keep this thing moving forward together. We'll be stronger that way. It'll move faster that way. Best of luck to you. Have an awesome day and rest of the show, and enjoy your weekends if you're sticking around in Atlanta. Thank you.